Thank you, Ms. Quincy. Appreciate it. Let me see here. All right. Good afternoon, members of the MAG Transit Committee. As a reminder, please turn your mics on and clearly state your name before speaking to ensure that members of the audience can hear you. And please mute your mics when not speaking to eliminate feedback noise. As a reminder, phone attendees will need to press *6 to unmute themselves. Because this is a virtual meeting, a roll call vote will be taken for each action item on the agenda. We will now begin the meeting with the roll call of all members. Hannah?
Thank you, Chair Sapien. I will start the roll call, starting with Jill Dusenberry.
Here.
Thank you. Matt Dudley.
Here.
Thank you. Sean Banda. Jason Crampton. Jose Macias.
Here.
Thank you. Jeff Graves.
Here.
Thank you. Don Coomer.
Here.
Thank you. Nathan Williams.
Here.
Thank you. Vice Chair Kevin Link.
Here.
Thank you. Christine McMurdy.
Here.
Thank you. Keith Loomis. Right. Greg McDowell standing in for Reed Kempton.
Here.
Thank you. Jody Sorrell. Kathy Colbath.
Here.
Thank you. Nina Arredondo.
Here.
Thank you. Jan Martin standing in for Heather Wilkie.
Here.
Thank you. Salvatore LaPuma.
Here.
Thank you. Ratna Corpella.
Here.
Thank you. Kristen Taylor. Eric Iverson.
Hi, Hannah. This is Sam Stevenson filling in for Eric today.
Thank you, Sam. Noted. Gabe Elias.
Here.
Thank you. Carol Ketcherside. Grant Anderson. Chair Sapien.
Present and accounted for.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed?
Hi, Hannah. This is Jason, Crampton, City of Chandler.
Thank you, Jason.
Hannah, this is Carol Ketcherside. I just joined.
Thank you, Carol.
This is Keith Loomis with Maricopa. I just joined as well.
Thank you so much.
I believe I saw Jody Sorrell hop on as well if you didn't get her.
Yep, I joined.
Thank you. Any other members that I missed? All right, thank you all. Chair, we have quorum.
Thank you so much, Hannah. I especially like that Sam Stevenson is a 2022 version. I believe that's a upgraded version.
Hey, I couldn't figure out how to change my name. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's great. I mean, the new improved Sam is always welcome. All right. Call to the audience. An opportunity for public comment on the agenda was provided ahead of the meeting. MAG staff, have we received any public comments?
Yes, Chair Sapien, we have one comment from the audience. We have received one public comment from Aaron Cov of Fountain Hills. Begin comment. I would like to know what is going on with light rail communications project and when we will start seeing trains with the new equipment come online. Also, when will we start seeing fare validators installed on station platforms and on buses? End comment. Thank you for the comment, and we will follow up on this comment after the meeting.
Thank you, Hannah. Item 3, Transportation Planning Program Manager's Report. Audra Kester Thomas, MAG Transportation Planning Program Manager, will provide us with a report on activities and of general interest. Audra?
Thank you, Chairman Sapien, members of MAG Transit Committee. Great to be with you here today. Just a few items for your interest. I'd first like to welcome Keith Loomis from the city of Maricopa, recently appointed to the Transit Committee. So Keith, welcome. Glad that you're here. In terms of projects and funding, I will be presenting a preliminary overview of the potential project and program impacts of Governor Ducey's veto of House Bill 2685, what we've referred to as enabling legislation here at MAG, as was requested by Christine McMurdy here later in today's agenda. This was a presentation previously given in July to a joint meeting of Transportation Policy Committee and MAG Regional Council. And then a few other funding notifications for the benefit and interest of the Transit Committee. We'd like to extend congratulations to the City of Phoenix for their $25 million award for a raised grant on a 3rd Street Rio Salado pedestrian bridge. This bridge will establish a regional connection, City of Phoenix, Tempe, and Mesa for residents walking and biking alongside the Rio Salado corridor and hopefully further west as well. This project was born from a MAG awarded active transportation design assistance project a few years ago and is a great example of how an early investment by the region can really benefit and bring additional value and new money to the region, including the City of Phoenix. So congratulations to the City of Phoenix on that exciting announcement. And then in addition to that, also congratulations to the City of Phoenix for the $16.3 million FTA grant award for low or no emission buses. This will help further support our region's commitment towards sustainable infrastructure and a step towards advancing new technologies, including bus electrification. So we're excited to support that effort as well. And again, congratulations to the City of Phoenix. That completes my report, Chairman Sapien. I'm happy to answer any questions offline.
Thank you so much, Audra. Does anyone have any questions? All right, next item, approval of the May 16th, 2022 Transit Committee meeting minutes. Do any of the members of the committee have questions or corrections to the minutes? If not, can I have a motion and a second from members of the committee?
So moved.
We have a motion from Jody,
Nina Arredondo, second.
second from Nina. Thank you both. Hannah will do a roll call vote. Please indicate how you vote.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start the roll, starting with Jill Dusenberry.
Aye.
Thank you. Matt Dudley.
Aye.
Thank you. Sean Banda. Jason Crampton.
Aye.
Thank you. Jose Macias.
Aye.
Thank you. Jeff Graves.
Aye.
Thank you. Don Coomer.
Approved.
Thank you. Nathan Williams.
Aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair Link.
Aye.
Thank you. Christine McMurdy.
Aye.
Thank you. Keith Loomis.
Aye.
Thank you. Greg McDowell.
Aye.
Thank you. Jody Sorrell.
Aye.
Thank you. Kathy Kolbach,
Aye.
thank you. Nina Arredondo,
Aye.
thank you. Jan Martin,
Aye.
thank you. Salvatore Lapuma,
Aye.
thank you. Ratna Corpella,
Aye.
thank you. Kristen Taylor, Sam Stevenson,
Aye.
thank you. Gabe Elias,
Aye.
thank you. Carol Ketcherside,
Aye.
thank you. Grant Anderson, and Chair Sapien.
Aye.
Thank you, Chair. The motion passes.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Thank you for everyone's diligent participation. Next up, we have approval of the June 6, 2022 Transit Committee and Active Transportation Committee joint meeting minutes. Do any of the members of the committee have questions or corrections to the minutes? If not, can I get a motion and a second to approve the June 6 minutes?
So moved. This is Jason, City of Chandler.
Second, Christine McMurdy and Goodyear.
Thank you both so much. Hannah will do a roll call vote. Please indicate how you vote.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start the roll call, starting with Jill Duesenberry.
Aye.
Thank you. Matt Dudley.
Aye.
Thank you. Jason Crampton.
Aye.
Thank you. Jose Macias. I didn't catch that. Can you please state that again?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Jeff Graves.
Aye.
Thank you. Don Coomer.
Yes.
Thank you. Nathan Williams.
Aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair Link.
Aye.
Thank you. Christine McMurdy.
Aye.
Thank you. Keith Loomis.
Aye.
Thank you. Greg McDowell.
Aye.
Thank you. Jody Sorrell.
Aye.
Thank you. Kathy Kolbach.
Aye.
Thank you. Nina Arredondo.
Aye.
Thank you. Jan Martin.
Aye.
Thank you. Salvatore Lapuma.
Aye.
Thank you. Ratna Corpella.
Aye.
Thank you. Sam Stevenson.
Aye.
Thank you. Gabe Elias.
Aye.
Thank you. Carol Ketcherside.
Aye.
Thank you. Chair Sapien.
Aye.
Thank you. Are there any members of the committee that I've missed? All right. Thank you to everyone. The motion has passed.
Thank you, everyone. Item number 6 is will be presented by Hannah Quincy, MAG Transportation Planner. This item is on the agenda for action. Hannah?
Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you and good afternoon, Chair Sapien and members of the Transit Committee. I am pleased to be here to present this afternoon. Next slide, please. Today, I'm presenting the revised locally preferred alternative for the Valley Metro Light Rail Transit Capital Extension Project for action. This project, listed in MAG's Momentum 2050 Regional Transportation Plans list of future high-capacity transit projects, will operate between downtown Phoenix and the state capitol. This project will enhance mobility and multimodal transportation and address growth by extending high-capacity transit to the Arizona state capitol. This is an employment node serving thousands of employees, a regional activity center, and a historic resource, as well as a corridor that's overwhelmingly transit dependent in comparison to the region. The Capitol extension is the first and long-awaited step to expand high-capacity transit farther into the West Valley. Next slide, please. The Capitol Extension project is a 1.4-mile light rail project. This high-capacity transit project was included in the 2003 MAG Regional Transportation Plan, as well as Proposition 400. From 2007 to 2014, the Capitol Extension was considered the first segment of a larger project formerly called the Phoenix West Extension. In 2014, the larger project was renamed to the Capitol I-10 West Extension. In 2016, the project was split into two phases. The segment of the project from downtown Phoenix to the state capitol was called Capitol I-10 West Extension Phase 1, while the segment from the state capitol to 79th Avenue I-10 Park and Ride was called the Capitol I-10 West Extension Phase 2. Each of these two phases was placed on its own timeline for implementation. Then, in early 2021, Valley Metro separated the two phases into distinct projects with designated names and acronyms. The project I'm presenting today is now called the Capitol Extension, with CapEx as the shorthand acronym name. Next slide, please. The first step in the development process for a high-capacity transit capital project is the initiation of an alternatives analysis, or called AA. As a part of this process, a study is conducted to look at a range of reasonable multimodal alternatives, as well as general alignment options. The conclusion of the AA, a locally preferred alternative, is identified. This is also called an LPA. I want to highlight how this project's original 2012 LPA compared to the current revised LPA. The Capitol Extension portion of the original 2012 LPA for the 11-mile single-phase project from downtown to the 79th Avenue I-10 Park and Ride is shown in the map on the left. The Capitol Extension portion of this alignment followed as a single-track couplet along Washington and Jefferson Streets, west from 1st to 7th Avenue, and a double track along Jefferson Street, west to 18th Avenue. From there, the alignment becomes Phase 2, turning north along 18th Avenue next to the state capitol to Van Buren Street to travel to the rest of the alignment. In 2021, the 2012 LPA was revised, as shown on the map on the right. This extends the single track to 19th Avenue to form a loop. The 1.4-mile long CapEx corridor connects with the South Central Extension Downtown Hub Light Rail at 3rd Avenue, traveling west along Washington and Adams Streets, south along 19th Avenue, and east along Jefferson Street to 3rd Avenue. Next slide, please. This new revised LPA, which differs from the 2012 LPA, resulted from a reevaluation of the corridor at the direction of Phoenix City Council. The reevaluation effort took place between 2019 and 2021, and it sought to examine new options and configurations that were previously unexplored and consider feedback from additional community and stakeholder outreach and workshops. The reevaluation considered formally studied alternatives, which included the 2012 LPA that was modified to connect to the South Central Extension Downtown Hub, as well as a Washington Street double track. The reevaluation also considered newly identified alternatives, including Concept A. This was Washington Street couplet, which was Washington Jefferson single track couplet with double track along Washington Adams Streets west of 7th Avenue. Concept B. This is a single track couplet along Washington and Jefferson Streets to 15th Avenue, then a double track along the curve to Adams Streets. Concept C. This is a full loop to 18th Avenue with a 19th Avenue option. This is a single track loop for the full project along Washington, Adams, and Jefferson Streets. The reevaluation effort resulted in 2 tiers of analysis. Tier 1 occurred from spring of 2019 to fall of 2020. Each alternative was evaluated using the criteria that included traffic and mobility impacts, transit ridership potential, economic development and redevelopment opportunities, potential impacts to right-of-way, historical, cultural, and other notable or sensitive land uses, operational efficiency, safety and security, and potential capital cost. The project team initially recommended concept C, the single track loop to 18th Avenue, to be advanced into project development. However, in the fall of 2020, Arizona Department of Public Safety, DPS, raised safety needs regarding the 18th Avenue segment. This led to a second tier analysis focused on the segments in the immediate vicinity of the state capitol. The tier 2 analysis resulted in an adjustment to the loop configuration to use 19th Avenue instead of 18th Avenue. This adjustment was agreed to by state representatives in August 2021. Next slide, please. Valley Metro conducted extensive public involvement during the CapEx corridor reevaluation from 2019 to 2021. This feedback received was used to inform the revised LPA during the 2 tiers of analysis. These efforts included 2 formal half-day workshops with various City of Phoenix departments, stakeholder meetings with various state of Arizona agencies, 3 in-person public meetings, and due to the COVID-19 pandemic, in-person public meetings planned for later in 2020 were converted to an online format. Valley Metro opened an online virtual public meeting from May 27th, 2020 through June 30th of 2020. Additionally, 4 live call-in sessions were held on June 16th, 2020 and June 20th of 2020. 2 of those were in English and 2 of those were in Spanish. Next slide, please. With the completion of an alternatives analysis and reevaluation, the recommended alternative that emerged is shown on your screen. The revised CapEx LPA will extend light rail via a single track loop configuration from the South Central Extension downtown hub at 3rd Avenue, traveling west along Washington and Adams Streets, south along 19th Avenue, and east along Jefferson Street to 3rd Avenue. The LPA map shown on the screen shows 3 station areas that are targeted and identified for future consideration. This alignment was recommended because it offers the greatest level of multimodal mobility performance. It has the lowest potential for right-of-way acquisitions. It's acceptable for cultural and sensitive impacts, and it best addresses safety needs at the state capitol. It also has the highest amount of community support. This information and the full CapEx LPA report can be accessed online via the Valley Metro website. Next slide, please. Valley Metro began preliminary engineering in late 2021 to develop the initial design and engineering work to a level of design that establishes the location of key project components and to establish a capital cost estimate. The preliminary capital cost estimate for CapEx is $585,659,000. The capital cost funding sources are shared by 22% from the City of Phoenix sales tax funds, 30% from the Regional Public Transportation Funds or Prop 400 funds, and 48% from the FTA or Federal Transit Administration Capital Investment Grant Funds. The source of annual operating costs are shared by the City of Phoenix and Farebox revenues. And the project is planned to open for revenue service on December 31st, 2027. Next slide, please. On November 3rd, 2021, the Phoenix City Council approved the revised CapEx LPA. And on November 18th, 2021, the Valley Metro Board of Directors approved the revised CapEx LPA. LPAs must be approved by MAG for required air quality conformity analysis and the inclusion in the Momentum 2050 MAG Regional Transportation Plan, which brings us to the action before you today. Next slide, please. Chair Sapien and members of the Transit Committee, this concludes my presentation. The action requested is shown on the screen. The action listed before you is to recommend approval of the locally preferred alternative for the Capital Extension Light Rail project and revised open to service date of December 31st, 2027, and the Momentum 2050 MAG Regional Transportation Plan, contingent on a finding of air quality conformity. Thank you, and I'm available to answer any questions from the committee at this time.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Excellent overview. This item is on the agenda for action. Are there any comments or questions before we entertain a motion, I should say?
This is Jason, City of Chandler. Just a quick question. With the opening date well after the expiration of Prop 400, how does the regional funding come into play? Will that be utilized before 2026, or is it kind of set aside, or is it counting on the extension at all, or is it completely Prop 400?
I'll address that question, and if anyone else would like to chime in, please go ahead, but this is a Prop 400 funded project.
Chairman Sapien, Hannah, Jason, just to be clear, we encumber those funds, and just like freeway projects and arterial projects, they are required, that revenue is generated during the horizon of Proposition 400. It's not needing to be spent by December 31st, 2025.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for your question.
Hannah, Jesus, this is Christine in Goodyear. Jesus, for the extension to continue to 79th Avenue, so phase 2, that is reliant on the extension of Prop 400?
Thank you for your question, Chair Sapien and members of the committee. That's correct. That project that you're referring to is in the investment plan for the extension of Proposition 400.
Thank you.
Do we have any other comments or questions from members of the committee? If not, is there a motion to approve?
This is Carol Ketcherside. I move approval as stated.
Thank you, Carol. Do we have a second?
Matt
Second.
Dudley Avondale, second.
Thank you, Matt. Hannah, we'll do a roll call vote. Please indicate how you vote when called upon.
Thank you, Chair Sapien. I'll start the roll with Jill Duesenberry.
Aye.
Thank you. Matt Dudley.
Aye.
Thank you. Jason Crampton.
Aye.
Thank you. Jose Macias.
Aye.
Thank you. Jeff Graves.
Aye.
Thank you. Don Coomer.
Yes.
Thank you. Nathan Williams.
Aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair Link.
Aye.
Thank you. Christine McMurdy.
Aye.
Thank you. Keith Loomis.
Aye.
Thank you. Greg McDowell.
Aye.
Thank you. Jody Sorrell.
Aye.
Thank you. Kathy Colback.
Aye.
Thank you. Nina Arredondo.
Aye.
Thank you. Jan Martin.
Aye.
Thank you. Salvatore LaPuma. Ratna Korpella.
Aye.
Thank you. Sam Stevenson.
Aye.
Thank you. Gabe Elias.
Aye.
Thank you. Carol Ketcherside.
Aye.
Thank you. Chair Sapien.
Aye.
Thank you. And is there anyone that I missed?
This is Kristen from Surprise. I came on late and I vote aye.
Thank you. All right, with that, Chair Sapien, the motion passes.
Thank you so much. Thank you for everyone's continued support in these efforts to continue improving and expanding the system that's once again seeing some good ridership. Next item is item 7, be presented by MB Finnerty, Valley Metro's Public Arts Administrator. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion. Be prepared, there's some really cool stuff in here. MB, go right ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Sapien and members of the Transit Committee. Can everyone hear me? Am I coming through?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So first slide, please. First of all, thank you for having me. What I will be doing today is talking a little bit about the Tempe Streetcar Public Art Program with an emphasis on our public involvement and how that works. I do speak a little fast, so I will go through this, but I'm happy to answer any questions at any time. Next slide, please. So I think all of you know Tempe Streetcar opened up earlier this year. It was delayed quite a bit, partly by the pandemic, but it is our first, Valley Metro's first streetcar, though not the Valley's first streetcar. What I want to talk about is that our public art process, which I was glad to be involved in this, we follow the same process that we do for light rail. Next slide, please. There were a few differences. For instance, we call these stops instead of stations, and the stops are much more like a bus stop. So they're smaller, the budget is smaller. In this instance, we had 14 stops, and when I was brought on, I had been part of this process, but the alignment had been divided into 4 sections. And these sections, what I noticed was they really did follow kind of different, each one had its own characteristics. And so rather than having 14 artists, I had decided, because these were smaller budgeted stops, to have 4 artists, 1 for each zone, and to kind of work forward from that. We do follow the 1%, up to 1% of construction budget for art. And we had a national call for artists, and we follow our RFQ process, which is a request for qualifications as opposed to a request for proposals. So we never want to have the artists selected on something they proposed, because it's very important that they come out and experience the area, talk to the people, and then make a proposal. So next slide, please. In Tempe, as you probably know, the citizens of Tempe are always very excited to participate in these types of things. And so we had very robust stakeholder art review committees. We always have our Regional Rail Arts Committee. That is our kind of our oversight or our arts board, made up of regional arts professionals. But it's really the stakeholder committees, which are made up of community members who will have the biggest emphasis. In this case, we had 4 committees. Each were about, I think, 8 to 9 or more. And what we did at the very beginning, we bring them together in each committee and to select the artists. And at the very beginning of the meeting, we asked them to kind of define and describe the major characteristics of their part of the zone. So in zone 1, up here at the top left, the artist selected was Corin Rolstad, and they really talked about the kind of the corporate nature of this. Obviously, there's a family fun area of the Tempe Beach Park, but you've got the lake, but you've got this very modern metal glass sensibility. Down in the right-hand corner, Simon Donovan and Ben Olmsted were the artists selected for this zone 2, which was the loop from around Mill and Ash. This was very much the university, but also the fun and unique, interesting street fairs and shops and merchant areas. To the left of that, at the bottom, Mary Lucking was selected for Zone 3. This is the Gamage Curve. Obviously, there's the Gamage Auditorium, but there's also very historical neighborhoods that are hugely important in this portion of the alignment. And then finally, the top right corner, Bobby Zakaitis was selected for Zone 4, which runs along Apache Boulevard and is very much to do with the ASU campus and then the neighborhoods beyond. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, could you go back one slide? So these artists, once they are selected by their committees, the first thing that the artists will do is try to talk to these committees, because these committee members know that their responsibility is not just selecting the artist and leaving. They get to select the artist. They get to kind of nurture the artist a little bit, explain to them what is important in their community, and then they will follow them through the design period. Next slide, please. So the artists, and here on the left, you can see, this is not a great image of the artist, but it does show that they come out for community meetings, for meet and greets, for events. In this case, it was a streetcar sync. Learn about the streetcar, talk to the artist. On the left, in the dark blue shirt, is Bobby Zakaitis. Ben Olmsted is holding the camera, and Simon is Donovan is in the right, and then in the very right corner is Mary Lucking. So they came out, and in fact, they will use these opportunities. In this case, Ben and Simon were doing a photographic portion of their project. So next slide, please. So in this case, this is the 5th Street Nash stop, and they had 2 elements in each of their stops. Each stop has its own theme. In this case, it was kind of a flower theme, and you have a milled steel panel on the bottom providing shade. It's solid, so you can have an image on each side, and based on the photography, you'll kind of get a moire effect. So some of the images are better than others, and then above in the glass, all of the stops have these glass roofs or ceilings rather. The artists actually worked with the contractor to kind of do a silkscreen frit process to glaze these images of above. So some of the photography that they were doing both in their studio in Tucson as well as in Tempe. In this case, I've seen pictures of them, having people holding flowers or holding like a weird bird or kind of some bizarre things. Next slide, please. Here's another image. The skateboarder on the right, and I apologize, I don't have her name. She is a kind of a fixture of the local skateboarding community. You can see this is the skateboard themed piece, and the glass above. This had to be done in their studio because they had to set up their camera and then have skateboarders kind of jump over it. So that was kind of some of these had to be done in their studio, but others they actually came out, talked to community members, took lots of pictures. A lot of the photos of their selection was really based on what worked and what didn't. Next, please. Bobby Zakaitis, he actually was a grad student at ASU in the sculpture department, and he lives in Tempe. So he is very much interested in reclaiming things, repurposing things, looking at the past and bringing new life to past things. This yard is a place where he walked by, he says, every day, and he saw these fabulous air handling machine, and he really wanted to use these. I had concerns. Fortunately or unfortunately, he was not able to purchase this really amazing big air handler machine. So he used them as inspiration. He created these. He's called tchotchkes at Dorsey and Apache. Next slide, please. And then here's another example for his love of the historic. And I think this really struck a chord with the community members, these beautiful old motel signs that really struck him for their, they're obviously really retro cool. So he kind of created his own. His studio and his shop is in Tempe. And so going out to watch him fabricate these was really pretty amazing. He's an amazing sculptor. Next, please. And then, of course, Mary Lucking, she is the queen of working with the community. She came out to several of the events, and she had a little table where people would come, and she would ask them about what's in your neighborhood, what were you most proud of, what do you see? And she came away with these amazing stories of people talking about coyotes that they would see running through the neighborhood, or peacocks, and of course, obviously, the students and the people that she sees in and around this area. So in the middle, you can see this, obviously, the Gamage Auditorium with the beautiful zigzag vertical. On the left is the neighborhood with the canal running through it. On the right is the neighborhood with the railroad running through it. And if you see these little gray dots kind of circled around here, those are, next slide, please, where the genius really comes in, because I love the screens that she created. But what's fabulous is that she then handmade these and cast them in aluminum. This is the peacock that she'd heard about. I think there's a coyote, another one, the owl, the bats that someone told her were by the bridge. The gardening. This is one of the little guys that would be in front of the Gamage Auditorium, and then students running through researching. So each of these screens are filled with these just really thoughtful, really whimsical creatures that she learned from the community. Next, please. So we take all of this, the artists come up with these designs after talking to the community. They have an internal review with our engineers, our maintenance and operations people. I call these my council of no, because usually they're the ones that raise their big red flag of, that's not safe enough, or that's too big, or that's going to interfere with people walking around. So once we get through them, we take this back to the SARC, that Stakeholder Art Review Committee, and they approve it or not. They might say, this is a little strange, or have you thought about this? The artists will then make some changes, and then we bring it to these public meetings. And here you can see this was in the Transit Center, the second floor, and you can see here's Mary Lucking's images of some of the creatures that she'd already been making, and you can see we try to make out the best graphics that we possibly can. So the public is involved both at the individual level all the way up to the big give us your input. Next slide, please. And then, of course, there's installation, which is always a really happy day for me. This on the left is Simon and Ben in zone 2. In the middle here, that is Mary Lucking standing in front of her creation. And then this is Bobby Zakaitis's piece that's along Apache. Next. Unfortunately, we did have one artist who was unable to finish her contract. That was Corin Ralsted. So in kind of an 11th hour, we brought in, we always rank the artists. So the first runner up in this case was Barbara Grigudis from Tucson. And she was a very professional, was able to jump in. And thank goodness our Stakeholder Art Review Committee for Zones 4 was also amazing. They came out, we were a little bit still the edges of the pandemic, so we did this all online, but we had a meet and greet with Barbara. She had to work in the frame with these foundations that had been laid, and so she knew she had to do something vertical, and she came up with a much more organic. Her sensibility is a little bit different, but it really perfectly matched that area, the glass and steel, as well as the A mountain with this. She has this rusted metal that evokes the idea of layered time. So next slide, please. So she worked at a breakneck speed. The committee worked at a breakneck speed to approve things. Here's Barbara and her fabricator in Tucson with, again, that rusted, beautiful patinaed steel, and then the aluminum. And here we are installing them in April, which was just in time. Next slide, please, for the May opening. And that is my presentation. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, MB. Very cool stuff. I always like seeing the art along the transit lines, first light rail and now with the streetcar. I would have envisioned something like a bunch of dollars dissipating into the air, because with the sun at ASU, that's kind of what I always feel when I go down there. But, what do I know about art? Are there any questions or comments from the committee about MB's excellent presentation?
Mr. Chair, this is Jody from Mesa. I'd like to say something.
Go ahead, Jody.
MB, I've had the fortunate ability of working with you and your team twice over the last couple of years on the art project. And I just, you have an excellent process. The art the art contributions along the way do a lot for the neighborhood. So I just want to give you guys kudos for what you do. Some of the stuff on our last project there were some challenges.
Yes.
But he's quickly become one of the favorites of a lot of people.
That's
so,
right.
I just want to thank you for what you do and how hard your staff works on not only going through the process, because it's a lengthy process to go through all of the artists' submissions and that whole neighborhood action group that reviews them. It's a process, but it's also very good because the neighborhood is then vested in this, and as many things, building projects like this that we can vest the neighborhood in is always a positive.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Jody. I agree. Sam, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, I really want to echo Jody's comments. MB, thank you for the presentation and for all of your work and efforts on this project. I can tell you guys every time I travel along the alignment, I find myself awe-stricken by the artwork, and I see it from a different perspective every time I travel along Apache or Mill Avenue. So if you haven't had a chance yet to check out the streetcar and some of the amazing art exhibits along the way, strongly encourage you to. It's a great experience.
Thank you very much.
Sean, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. So the first phase, you guys did the publication saying the art of the light rail. Are you guys gonna be doing a secondary publication or adding on to the publication? It's a great book and I love sharing it with people. I think it's fantastic.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, we are working on it. Because of the delay with the pandemic, and Barbara's work wasn't in time to get something out. We usually either do postcards or a poster or a book, and we were not able to do it in time for the opening, so we kind of pushed it back. I believe Valley Metro is also planning some additional streetcar promotional activities over the fall, which I realize we are kind of getting into the fall, though it doesn't feel like it yet. So we are planning a book of some sort. So yes.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Thank you, MB. Always very entertaining, and I agree with what my colleague said. You do a great job of getting over those obstacles when they raise themselves, but more than anything, working with the community and getting that input, because some of the stuff out there is really, really cool. Thank you for everything you do. All right, next item. Item number 8 on the agenda, presented by Audra, Mag Transportation Planning Program Manager. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion. Audra?
Thank you, Chairman Sapien. And unfortunately, this is a hard turn the other direction following MB. But Christine McMurdy had requested that we bring this presentation given in joint session of TPC and Regional Council, and since been presented to several additional audiences to the Transit Committee to talk more about the implications of the unfortunate veto of Governor Ducey of HB 2685, what we refer to as enabling legislation. Next slide. Next slide. So I'll start a little bit with some background and history, orient ourselves particularly in the legacy of the dedicated half-cent sales tax. I'll briefly touch on the investment plan. You are all very well versed, of course, in our planned investments, but then I'll talk a little bit more about the implications to each of our 3 major programs, both in terms of long-term frame as well as immediate implications, and then talk and conclude with next steps. Next slide. So a little background, next slide. This is an audience that I don't have to emphasize the importance, of course, of how instrumental the dedicated half-cent sales tax has been to our transportation network and system. It really was born out of a fast growth region without any funding available to respond meaningfully and invest in high capacity transportation investments. Overwhelmingly supported by voters in 1985 and then again in 2004. This is a investment that has dedicated the legacy really of our transportation investments, and is really the reason why the greater Phoenix metropolitan area is the economic engine for the state of Arizona. Next slide. So I always think it's important, and these slides in particular really tell an enormous story. This is the transportation system back in 1986, for those of you who were here at that time. We had I-17 cutting through the north-south of the system, but even Interstate 10 wasn't completed. That last segment that goes coast to coast, ocean to ocean, was really the Deck Park Tunnel here in central Phoenix, and that wasn't completed until the early 1990s. Mayors came together after realizing the time it would take to establish the Loop 101 was 25 years. And they deemed that completely unacceptable, rightfully so, and decided to tax themselves in order to invest in the, at that time, freeway system necessary to support a rapidly growing Phoenix metropolitan region. Next slide. And with it was Proposition 300, what we know today as the Loop system, largely established by that 20-year investment, delivering and establishing the Loop 101, Loop 202 corridors, in addition delivering 51 and 143, really completely transforming the composition of these facilities. Just a note, and to provide a bit of a dovetail to an earlier question from Jason Crampton, Loop 202 Red Mountain Freeway in Mesa was the last segment of investment out of Proposition 300, and that didn't come in terms of open to service and completion well after ultimately Proposition 300 collections had officially concluded. Next slide. Our work wasn't done. Proposition 400 was passed by voters, and in this case became a multimodal tax. It helped to establish, of course, Loop 303, finished Loop 202 South Mountain Freeway, opening just a few years ago. It helped contribute, of course, to the important transit investments, helping to establish the light rail system as well as streetcar, which just opened a few months ago. But what's important to recognize here too are the investments you don't necessarily see on this map. The iterative additions of general purpose lanes, the additions of the HOV system, multitude of traffic interchanges and modernizations of those core pieces of infrastructure, but hundreds of miles of arterial investments. That contiguous grid system, for which is very unique to this region, carries about half of our traffic on any given day, also serves as the backbone of our bus network and active transportation network. The region supports over 7 million revenue miles of bus service throughout the region, wholly funding the ADA paratransit investment that is federally required alongside. We don't see on this map the wide and improved freeway investments, iterative after the corridors are originally established, or the ancillary investments that are paired with our federal funding, whether it's in air quality or active transportation investments, safety, and ITS. Next slide. You've seen this slide before. I use it all the time to communicate how important these investments are to our quality of life. The freeway system on average saves you about 25% of your time each year, over 100 hours in traffic. Most of our jobs are located within a mile or two of a freeway or a high capacity transit corridor, and transportation investments really unlock the economic potential and bring economic prosperity to this region. Next slide. We're not the only ones who recognize this. Our partners in economic development tout our transportation network as our #1 quality here in this region. GPEC, their numbers in the last 20 years are much higher for the percentage of locates that are within a mile or two of a freeway corridor or the light rail corridor system. Very, very tremendous asset, and it's what is their secret sauce ultimately to compete with the Austins, Denvers, Portlands, and San Diegos of the world. Next slide. And then, of course, the public really is our best champions. They recognize how valuable the transportation investments are. They don't necessarily know who's responsible for them, but they know there's forethought and planning that goes into them. They don't see jurisdictional boundaries, and we do our best to ensure that they don't feel them as well. And that's one of the reasons why when we built this plan, ultimately, from a tremendous amount of public engagement, we are not surprised to see that it is overwhelmingly supported by voters, polling with over 70% of support. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the investment plan itself and where we go from here. Next slide. Again, it's important to recognize while we champion and talk a lot about how precious that dedicated half-cent sales tax is, it's our most flexible funding source available to the region. We leverage that funding against what the region already has coming in terms of federal formula funds, as well as our share of the Highway User Revenue Fund. In total, we have over $36.7 billion anticipated in revenue over the next 25 years that contribute not only to the discrete capital projects we've identified, but the myriad of programs for which are regionally significant. Next slide. You know this map well. This is the discrete capital projects. I won't spend time here other than to emphasize the multimodal nature of the investment package itself and how it does touch the whole of our region, ensuring that everyone who contributes, of course, to this funding source, of course, also sees benefit thereof. Next slide. I also want to emphasize any opportunity I get that it's not just the map with those projects. This is a group that knows very well that so much of the important investment within the extension comes from the things that you don't necessarily get to see on a map. Those important program investments, the bus transit service, for which is tremendously important, for which we've doubled as part of the investment package to ensure that we can continue to extend and expand, but perhaps more importantly, improve the quality of bus service that we're providing, and certainly what we continue to hear a tremendous amount of support and need for throughout the region. Next slide. So you'll see here the legacy of this dedicated half-cent sales tax, first established by voters back in 1985, funding starting to come into the region in 86 and on. This was at the time in 1985, 86, one of the first in the country to be established. It is now highly replicated, stacked in most cases in our peer regions, using this as a local funding source to ensure transportation investments, which public, not just here, but in our peer regions, very much value and always support at the ballot box. What you see here is the legacy of that investment over the last 40 years and our intent to continue it for the next 25. Next slide. Ultimately, if we aren't able to have enabling legislation successful, we will lose over half of the funding made available to this region, which will completely decimate the transportation system network, let alone its expansion well into the future. And that will largely be the remaining slides that I show you today, is what impact we will see. Next slide. This is to illustrate now the world we live in. We have a tremendous amount of assumed risk and uncertainty associated with our program. We have spent the last 4 years building up to this legislative session with an anticipated movement to this November, where our residents would have the opportunity to weigh in on continuing this important sales tax. Ultimately, we're now in a sense of uncertainty. We do not have a pathway to the ballot, and that provides a lot more risk. That costs money and brings a lot of uncertainty to our project development process, and that impacts not just those long-range projects, which we've identified as part of the investment plan, but it impacts our current program as well, because as this audience knows, so many of our large capital projects take years, if not decades or a generation, really to move from vision through environmental design work, ultimately through right-of-way acquisition to construction and open to service. Next slide. Let's start with the Arterial Program, talk about impacts to it. Next slide. One of the things that we heard down at the legislature, and certainly from a couple of our opponents, was denoting this investment package as a transit slush fund. And while indeed the amount of transit investment went up commensurate with the public feedback and feedback from our member agencies for the need to diversify our multimodal portfolio, actually the biggest pinch in the program relative to the existing Proposition 400 program is in arterials and regional programs, as you will see here illustrated in these pie charts. Next slide. The reason that is because of a tremendously diminishing revenue source known as the Highway User Revenue Fund. You'll see illustrated here, when adjusted for inflation, the amount of funding the Highway User Revenue Fund used to be referred to as the gas tax were what revenues came into the state of Arizona starting back in 2000 all the way through last year. And what you see here is that in the year 2000, the state received more in highway user revenue funds than we did last year. What you see behind it is the state's population growth over that same time period. Next slide. And the outcome here ultimately is we are reusing our roadways more and more every single day. You'll see here that over that same time frame of 21 years, our state's population grew by 40%. What once was a tremendously valuable revenue source has diminished in its value, and that's one of the reasons why there's so much pressure placed. And when you all submitted for the call for projects 3 years ago as part of the RTP development, there was so much demonstrated need, over $90 billion of transportation need, because the pinch felt at a local level for the diminishing value of this particular revenue source puts additional pressure and need ultimately on what the region can deliver. Next slide. What does this look like in terms of the realities of the program itself? Why we see the composition, or what the composition of the investment plan looks like, is largely colored by these funding realities. The diminishing value of the Highway User Revenue Fund, changes in regional priorities as we continue to urbanize and diversify our transportation needs, and the importance of some projects and programs as it relates to the quality of life, something that's very valuable to our constituents and elected officials. Failure to extend Proposition 400 for the Arterial Program will have region-wide impacts, including fewer new and improved roadways. It'll limit agencies' ability to respond to economic development opportunities when new business or locates come into a community. And you will continue to see the diminishing condition and operational effectiveness of our arterial roadways throughout the region. Next slide. Switch to the transit program, and as many of you already know, the picture gets worse. Next slide. Transit in this region is funded through a combination of local, regional, and federal resources. We do not have a statewide revenue source available to support transit. We're one of the only states, if not the only state in the nation not to. And as mentioned, there was significant demand expressed for the expanded transit investment as part of the extension of Proposition 400, both from member agencies as well as constituents. As a result, the total planned allocation for transit bus operations was increased to reflect this demand and need throughout the region. But more importantly, in the immediate, the veto of the extension of Proposition 400 puts into question and at risk current service operating today. Next slide. This first map will show you existing transit routes by funding source. You'll see in gray, those are wholly locally funded routes. In blue, it's a combination of local and regional funding. And then in that tangerine or red color, those are wholly regionally funded routes. Next slide. Here you'll see our commuter bus or express service. Similarly here in gray, you'll recognize those as wholly locally funded. In red, wholly regionally funded. And then that blue route is a mix and combination of local and regional funding. Next slide. In combination, this slide illustrates every single route that is currently operating that has regional funding in whole or part, identified as a route that may be in risk if we are unable to continue the extension of Proposition 400. We heard from our member agencies, our managers in particular, that keeping constant transit service out of Proposition 400 and into the extension was paramount. Without that dedicated revenue service continuing, not only are we questioning the ability to expand service and provide improvements, all of the routes identified in red are at risk for continuing and would put wholly the burden for operation on local communities. Next slide. So as mentioned, not only are we putting at risk the ability to expand and provide needed transit service across the region, we're also now really having to emphasize the need to look at service we have on our routes today. That includes ADA paratransit, for which the region wholly picks up for all member agencies. and needing to find a local funding source to replace it. So that map I just showed you largely underestimates the potential routes at risk because local agencies, you all, would be forced to find additional revenue or to cut your own service to be able to make up for that cost of paratransit service. And then finally, we'd have limited opportunities in service expansion unless funded wholly at the local level. Next slide. Let's move on finally to the Freeway program. Next slide. I think it's important to recognize again that these major capital projects take a long time and commitment to deliver. You'll see here the final projects within the funded Proposition 400 program that includes considerable and high priority projects, in some cases that are already under construction or were scheduled to go into final design within the next upcoming weeks. Next slide. In particular, I wanted to highlight these projects that are of highest risk. That includes I-10 Jackrabbit Trail, traffic interchange that sees today backups onto the main line. If you're in the West Valley, you have seen and experienced this high priority safety matter at Jackrabbit Trail. Same goes for Baseline Road in Tempe. Of note is the center segment of SR30, and as well as the extension of Loop 303 down to meet that future facility. We have over a $500 million set aside as part of the Proposition 400 program to do advanced right-of-way acquisition and important and sensitive utility work. There's a pipeline that feeds the Palo Verde nuclear facility. Work for encasement of that can only occur twice every single year, so any delay in schedule cannot be made up. Unfortunately, with the governor's veto, commitment long-term to construction of that facility is in question. And so we've had to pull back some of that work. And in this case, what that results in is likely a 2-year delay for readiness of that center segment of SR30, even if we are able to find a solution to the extension of Proposition 400. Also notable is the widening of I-10 through the Gila River Indian community. MAG has had over $200 million awaiting a match from the state to advance that project. This legislative session, we were excited to see and are very supportive and thankful for the legislative partnership that was able to deliver $400 million in an appropriation to support that project. But it's important to note that is not enough funding to complete the project. And therefore, MAG has had to partner with ADOT in the Gila River Indian community to chase one of those mega grants, a federal discretionary grant, to make up the difference of funding to ensure that project is fully funded. If we're unable to be successful in that highly competitive grant program, the region will be faced with whether to determine that if that $225 million is the highest of priorities for I-10 on a statewide priority if we do not have a successful path to the ballot, or an assured funding source into the long-term future. Next slide. This slide further illustrates the economic impact across the region. You'll see here the Freeway program selected projects, not all of the projects that are included in the Extensions Freeway program. But what I want to emphasize here is how many of these projects are commiserate to in supporting major important economic development investments. These are the things that are bringing high quality, high paying jobs to the region, transforming our economy and making this region, again, that economic engine for the state of Arizona. These projects are now wholly in question without the extension of Proposition 400. Next slide. So it's important to emphasize these points. Without a continuation of the dedicated half-cent sales tax, freeway expansions in this region is bleak. Funding we have remaining available through our federal funds would be used only to meet federal performance targets, focused singularly on maintenance, rehabilitation, and safety matters. The region would be unable to build any new freeways, and what is limited in terms of revenue sources, we would see minor, perhaps only minor expansions or system modifications to existing facilities. And an important point that I want you to take away is that federal and state resources by themselves are insufficient to make up this gap. We're expecting over $19 billion to be generated by the dedicated half-cent sales tax. That $400 million that was contributed by the state legislature for I-10 is really important, but I want to remind you, we have demonstrated needs of transportation in this region of over $90 billion. And I hope these next slides help to illustrate how critical that is. Next. Let's take the Cis SR30 facility singularly as an example here. That middle segment that I referred to earlier, for which we already have a $500 million dedicated in Proposition 400 revenues to construct that facility, as well as the completion of the Loop 303 South, is $2.5 billion, simply for that middle section alone. Next slide. In order to complete just that segment, we would have to save up all 25 years worth of our highway revenue funds to the region to deliver just that one project. So that hopefully illustrates just the difference in size and scale we're talking about. A lot of folks have pointed to IIJA, which is a tremendous investment nationally into important and needed infrastructure investments. But it's important to bring this into context. That mega grant that I referenced earlier, for which we are chasing in partnership with ADOT and the Gila River Indian Community for I-10, there's $1 billion available nationally, and only half of that can be chased for with projects of this magnitude or size. In these instances, it is looked on as a favorable grant if you are bringing at least a 40% match to the project. In other words, you're keeping the federal discretionary grant to under 40%. We will not have a local funding match unless we have the dedicated half-cent sales tax. And then, as mentioned, in contrast to the I-10, $400 million was granted from the state legislature for that important project, but that doesn't fully fund it. And that took a considerable amount of capital this legislative session for a project everyone agrees is important to get to the finish line. Next slide. So the real message here is we have to begin slowing down the program with this added risk and uncertainty and no pathway to a ballot and no assured long-term revenue source. Long-term projects need to be paused, and that means real implications to existing funded projects within our existing Proposition 400 program. Next slide. Next slide. So some key takeaways for you. Next slide. VETO has impacts not just to our long-term program and projects, but also to our existing projects. Something I didn't mention earlier is the cost to wait will also have monetary impacts as well. Inflationary rates in this region are particularly high. If you look at just that center segment of SR30 alone, a delay of 2 years, which is what we're anticipating with the VETO for just that center segment for construction, is going to cost the region $300 or $400 million in inflationary costs to the exact same project we would have otherwise been able to advance to construction if we had the vote this November. Inaction will lead to greater cost burden placed on local communities, and that's particularly relevant for all of you running transit. The loss of the dedicated half-cent sales tax will mean we won't be able to keep up with current, let alone future growth, and that means a true impact ultimately to economic development, prosperity, and at the bottom line, our quality of life. The good news is your mayors have committed, of course, to the plan itself and finding a solution, and for which we are feverishly looking at our options to do so. Next slide. So before we move on to this presentation and open it up for questions, I do want to say the following. We're working on a number of fronts and working very fast and furious to pull together the information that we weren't expecting we would need, but certainly to provide policymakers to look for a solution. At current time, we're working with the governor's office to better understand what their concerns are. The good news is we have legislators who care a lot about this work, and that includes some that lost in their primaries back in August. They want to see a successful resolution, and they're here working with us in support of finding a solution. In the near term, that could potentially be something rare, maybe a special session before the end of the calendar year. That's something we don't see in Arizona very often, but I think it emphasizes the importance of finding a resolve to this issue in particular, why it's important to move on sense of urgency thereof, as well as other legislative and legal alternatives for which we've been working closely with your elected officials, specifically through our executive committee and executive session to advance. What I can tell you is that we have a number of fronts that we're working concurrently on, but ultimately this is a political issue for which we are being very delicate about and finding a good strategy, one that works for our best success. And so with that, I will complete my presentation. Chairman Sapien, turn it over to you, and if there's any questions to be answered by the committee.
Thank you so much, Audra, and I want to personally thank you and other MAG staff who have been diligently working on this for literally years. And it was unfortunate, very unfortunate to see the letter come across how it did and when it did and what was included therein. So thank you for that very in-depth overview. If folks want to raise their hands, or I can just ask if there's any questions or comments from members of the committee.
I have a question, Anderson.
Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
It would be nice to know what is preventing an override of the veto, i.e. which legislative people are not allowing it to move forward. They're just as much, at fault as maybe the governor is.
Chairman Sapien, Mr. Anderson, we can certainly provide you the vote totals for both the House and Senate. We did not have a 2/3 majority in the House of Representatives, and to be able to override a veto, you do need 2/3 in both houses of the legislature.
That'd be interesting to know. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? All right. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
Yeah, sorry. This just kind of been going through my head lately is, I know we have an FTA liaison in the Valley, and I'm just curious if the FTA has any interest in this situation, only because that's a whole lot of service that's going to end. It seems to me in a horrible impact to civil rights and a number of other things, but I don't have anything to go by to understand whether they have any kind of role or are able to provide any assistance in maybe liaising with the governor's office. I'm just curious about that.
Chairman Sapien, Ms. McMurdy, we actually did have, as part of our quadrennial federal certification, the opportunity to meet not just with our local FTA advisor, but also District 9, as well as our FHWA folks as well. So they're fully aware, but I want to emphasize this is a political matter for which our administrators won't weigh in on.
I would concur with that, Audra. They see this as a local issue. Carol, go ahead.
So just for purposes of this discussion, you may say yes or no. Were there Maricopa County state legislators who voted against this?
Yes.
Okay. I look forward to seeing the list.
Will that list be sent to all of us?
We'll make sure you have the opportunity for member agencies in particular. I'd encourage you to work through your intergovs as well for more detailed insights on the legislative front.
Yep. But the bottom line is the legislature did pass it, and it was a governor's action that we're dealing with now.
Some don't have intergovs, so maybe committee members might be appropriate.
I'd be happy to meet with you or follow up one-on-one with you, Grant.
All right.
Mr. Chair, this is Jason.
Go ahead,
City
Jason.
Chandler. I just wanted to take an opportunity to thank Audra and John Bullen as well. You guys are doing a lot of really good work in this, getting the word out. Audra was just out to the city of Chandler on Friday at the Chamber of Commerce, giving the same message to the business community out there. The more people we can get this message to, hopefully the more it gets back to some of the elected officials. But really appreciate the hard work. I know you guys are pushing the overtime and getting this message out, so thank you.
Agreed, Jason. This has been a heavy lift on behalf of the region, so totally agree. Anyone else? All right, thank you so much. Next item number 9 on the agenda will be presented by the esteemed Ken Kessler, City of Phoenix. This item is for information and discussion. Mr. Kessler, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Sapien. Members of the committee, I just want to give a brief overview of the grant status report that's in your agenda packet and answer any questions you might have. As you can see, we've got a little over $2.1 billion in awarded funds in active grants currently, with about a little over 500 million remaining to be spent. Overall, we're doing okay. That's about 75% of the awarded funds that have been spent down. Of course, we could always do better. It's always our goal to try to get that number in the right column of the report under federal funds remaining down to as low as possible to make sure we're moving our grant funds. In particular, we're doing a pretty good job with the COVID relief funds, with just a little bit of CARES Act funds to be spent. That's basically in the Avondale Goodyear UZA, that those funds should be completely spent and drawn down this year. And then CRISA funds and the ARPA funds are moving pretty well. Just want to encourage our members that are operators to make sure that you're moving your reimbursements for your operating assistance under CRISA and ARPA, so we can get those monies fully spent down. So just a reminder there to, as you incur your operating costs that you have not yet had any reimbursement for under those programs, to get those over to our team to make sure we're moving that grant money out the door as quickly as possible. Other than that, we just, we have some delays in purchasing buses and things like that are really out of our control, that are kind of keeping the level of grant funds remaining a little higher than we'd like to see. So hopefully once we can get manufacturing moving along a little more timely and get some of those bus orders moving, we'll start to see some movement on those funds as well. So that's really all I had as far as what I wanted to mention and highlight. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about the report from any of the committee members.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Kessler? Not
Chair
seeing.
Sapien, I just
Yes,
wanted
go
to
ahead.
provide an update that we received an updated report from Mr. Kessler, and I will be uploading an updated agenda packet following the meeting.
Oh, thank you, Hannah. Yeah, that reminds me. There was an error on pages 2 and 3. We had the federal funding year inadvertently identified on, I think it was 6 different grants as the program number, section 5307, that I just noted and corrected and got it over to Hannah right before the meeting started. So the first 2, I believe, were fiscal year 18. The next 2 were fiscal year 19. And the next 2 were fiscal year 20. I believe there were 6 grants on pages 2 and 3 that had 5307 instead of the funding year.
Perfect. Thank you both. We'll get that packet updated and posted. All right. Item number 10, request for future agenda items. Are there any requests by a committee member for a future agenda item? All right, hearing none. Item 11, member agency updates. Are there any updates or announcements by committee members? Not seeing or hearing none. Hearing any, rather. Next meeting date, a reminder to committee members that our next meeting is scheduled for Monday, October 3rd, 2022 at 1 p.m. via teleconference. And with no further business, the meeting of the MAG Transit Committee is now adjourned at 2:24 p.m. And you lucked out, there's no roll call needed for adjournment. Thank you everyone for hanging on and participating in your attention. Have a good month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.